Good evening.
Good evening.
I'll have you state your name and spell your last name for the record.
My name is Chad Moldenhauer, C-H-A-D, Moldenhauer, M-O-L-D-E-N-H-A-U-E-R.
Mr. Moldenhauer, you were in the room earlier when I went through the penalties for perjury.
I've been in the room for a long time, so that would be yes.
Probably more than once. Do you understand what perjury is?
I do.
And being advised of the potential penalties for perjury, do you promise to tell the truth in this case today?
Yes, I do.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Brocky.
Mr. Moldenhauer, are you a lifelong resident of Burleigh County and Bismarck?
Yes, I am. When I was in school, I spent some time in Moorhead going to Concordia College, and after that at Grand Forks going to University of North Dakota School of Law. But in the summers, I always came back and worked for our company.
Okay. And can you tell us what your family business has been, including up to the present?
Sure. My father, Kelly, and my mother, Lana, moved to town here in Bismarck in 1978. And my father was a shop teacher and built his first spec home that first year in 1978. And after 10 years, he built progressively more and more homes and retired from teaching back in 1988. And for that next 30-some years, he had K&L Homes here in Bismarck and did some land development as well. In the time that he owned the company, he built over 400 homes. I took over back in 2009, and since that amount of time, I've been building homes in the community and developing as well.
And can you tell the Commissioner some of the developments that you've been involved in building and your family has in the Bismarck and Burleigh County area?
Sure. Like I said, I've been involved in the company for a very long time, but our very first development, large-scale development, started back in 2001, prior to my ownership of the company. That development is K&L's development. It was done over 6 phases and consists of about 175 lots. The last of those projects I actually finished up when I took over the company in 2009, and there were probably about 40 lots in that last chunk of the last 2 years. After I got done with K&L's 6th edition, I moved up to Promontory Point and built some homes up there for several years. And then I purchased land starting actually in 2012 adjacent to 57th Avenue and west of Washington in Bismarck. In 2016, actually, the developments were approved and we started our first homes in Heritage Park and Heritage Ridge in Bismarck. Heritage Park is a community that caters to maintenance-free living. We have a lot of retirement-age people in that community. There currently are 2 phases of that development, of which we're about 2/3 full, and of those 2 phases, we have about 190 lots, and I built every one of the homes in those 2 phases. We also have a sister development right next door to that, that's Heritage Ridge. That development consists of 90 lots, and I think we're about 2/3 of the way through that development too. We've built all those homes. I've got some other properties that we work into. I've got a new development we're doing called Heritage Cottages, and then I just started back a few years ago on a new development up north called Heritage Reserve, which is consisting of 60 lots.
Okay, and let's focus on Heritage Reserve because that is the development of yours that is very close to the Summit pipeline. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and if we look at Exhibit 196, you have that in your binder.
Okay. I apologize, there's a lot here.
Yes, there is.
Okay, I think I'm on 196.
Okay. And does that show the location of your Heritage Reserve project?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And we can see on the left-hand side of Heritage Reserve a road. Is that Highway 83?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then what's shown on there for the location for Heritage Reserve, is that the entire parcel of what the intended development covers?
That's correct. I own 245 acres in that area, which I own under my development company, Heritage Development. The first phase consists of 60 lots over 77 acres. The planned build-out right now is 180 lots. That could be adjusted a bit, given the fact that those future phases haven't been approved yet, so it could be anywhere from 180 to 200 by the time it gets done.
Okay. And the 60 lots, is that where you presently have infrastructure installed?
That's correct.
Okay. And then how many homes have been built on those 60 lots so far?
So we have 10 completed homes in that development right now. We have 3 more under construction, a few other that we're designing as well. Of the 60 lots that we have there, I believe we have 15 to 20 sold at this point.
And then what are the size of those lots, and what is the typical range of the home prices in that Heritage Reserve development?
Sure. So just to give you a little bit of background on the reasoning behind Heritage Reserve, I wanted to kind of have an option for people that maybe want larger lots than your typical average city size, which is a third of an acre, but not quite as big as maybe a 5 or a 10 acre parcel, which can mean just a lot more maintenance for people. I thought that 1 acre was a pretty good number to go with. Anything smaller, and it's like you're in a city lot, anything bigger, and like I said, it's just a little more maintenance that people are looking for. So the largest lot that we have in the development is about 1.2 acres.
Okay. And perhaps a better map to look at would be Exhibit 197. Is that the actual plat map that shows the layout of the lots and the different phases?
Yes, that's the total build-out map. So the first phase is going to be labeled in red, and then the additional phases that are proposed to come after that will follow to the north.
Okay. And so is Phase 1 the 60 lots you talked about?
Correct.
Okay. And so what is the for the homes, the 10 completed homes in Phase 1? What is the price range for those? What's the low end and what's the high end?
Sure. So a lot of times when I sell a home in that subdivision, we include the lot, we include the landscaping and the house itself. The least expensive home that we've sold so far this year in that development, since the start of that development, which is about 2 years we've been building homes there, is about $750,000. The most expensive home in that development is going to be closer to about $1.5 million.
Okay, and is that the expected price range, not accounting for inflation, that you would expect for the homes in that development moving forward?
It is. I'm a little different than most developers in that I'm developing land for my company to build on, and so we don't generally open up our developments to other developers or builders in the community. So we are, I think, a very well-respected company in town, and we do build a more high-end home.
Okay, and then can you take a look at Exhibit 199? That's an aerial view. I think you had an extra copy. I think it's actually a photograph that you obtained.
So I know the document that you're referring to. I haven't been in this room all day, either fortunately or unfortunately. I had a closing this morning up at Heritage Reserve. And I took that opportunity to take my drone out and take a picture just to give the commissioners a better idea of what the land looks like and kind of the surrounding area that the pipelines can be run through.
So take a look at Exhibit 199 and identify for the commissioners what that shows.
Sure. So the development that is closest to where the drone was is Heritage Reserve. You can see off to the left of the entry we have some signage with the granite backdrop. Off to the right we have additional signage that was placed, and then just right behind that is our private park that we put in place last year, and then. The last portion of the land that I own right now is actually on the other side of the trees. You can see that there's a field that has been tilled. That would be the end of that 245 acres and that 180 lot build out. I did place an arrow where the pipeline is projected to be placed right now, which is right adjacent to Highway 83, and there's a couple of small coulees that it comes out in between. That's kind of how I got my reference. Just past that, there is the Prairie View Landscaping Nursery, and then even further past that is the ranch subdivision, and that's been discussed earlier in the conversations today. I believe Mrs. Ondal said that there were 120 lots in that subdivision right now, but that there could be a build-out of as many as 300 or so.
And then the distance that is shown between the north end of the Heritage Reserve property, which is identified on Exhibit 195, is approximately 1,900 feet from the north end of Heritage Reserve to the pipeline where it's projected to go, correct?
That's correct.
And so let's talk about the contacts that you've had with Summit, and to kind of speed this up, I'm just going to let you kind of chronologically tell the commissioners about the contacts you've had with Summit, started with the earliest one, and then bring us to present.
Sure. I believe the first contact that I had with a Summit representative was back in the fall of 2021. I had a gentleman reach out to me, and he had said that the pipeline at that time was currently being sited on 110th Avenue, which is just to the south. And I should probably back up and say he did some cursory introduction of the project that he was working on. He said that he was siting a CO2 pipeline. He said CO2 is expelled in the air that we breathe out. It's in our pop cans. I remember he made that analogy in the CO2. And so it to some extent justified the reason why that he was calling me. He said that they wanted to do some surveying work through my property because they were looking at some other routing options. And at that time, I didn't ask a lot of questions because I get called by folks that are possibly considering putting in electrical lines and gas lines all the time in and around my development. So it didn't really alarm me. And I guess I thought to myself, I don't have to sign an easement. Worst case scenario, he surveys my land, I learn more, and I decide later that it's not in the right interest of my property. It was probably about 2 months later that actually a foreman of K&L Homes, when my father owned it, reached out to me, and he said, "Have you heard about this CO2 pipeline?" And I said, "Well, I know that there's a pipeline being proposed, but not much outside of that." And he talked to me about some of the dangers of the pipeline, went over some of the incidents in Satartia, and gave me enough information that it tipped me off. This is not something that I want anywhere near my subdivision or my developments, or my community for that matter. So I did call the gentleman back. I had a voicemail on my phone at the time, and I got him on the phone and I said, I have no interest in having this pipeline on my property, so please cancel your surveyors. And that was, I think, the last of what I thought I would hear from Summit Carbon Solutions. It was that next spring that I actually had a city commissioner, a county commissioner, reach out to me and say, "I don't know if you saw the commission meeting last night, but this pipeline is sited directly across your property," and that was incredibly alarming to me because I thought I was pretty clear with Summit and the person that I reached out to. So I actually got a hold of Wade Basons at Summit Carbon Solutions. I actually had his brother, I believe it was, reach out to me about some possible development land and some potential there. So I explained to him, this is land that's going to be used for residential development. It is not conducive to having a CO2 pipeline anywhere close to it. And I said, frankly, I couldn't stand for that pipeline to be located in that area. He seemed to understand, and I thought I'd made some headway with Wade. And so I kind of, once again, forgot about it for a while. And then I was reading or listening on the county commission meetings, and they were discussing the pipeline again, and they were talking about routing it very close to my area in Highway 83. So I jumped on to Summit's website, and I pulled out their pipeline map. And the map was incredibly fuzzy, not in high resolution, but it looked like it was right at the corner of my property at that point, on the north side of my property. So once again, I reached out to, I think the only contact I had, because Wade had actually called me from his cell phone, I believe, was the info line at Summit Carbon Solutions. And I reached out to them and said, hey, I had a conversation with Wade. It's not good to have this close to my development. It's not good for the company. It's not good for my development. And I got a response back from, I think it was a gentleman named Alex Lane. And he said that we actually have submitted our information to the PSC, and it's a half mile to the north of the subdivision. And certainly, although I'm not pleased with that distance, it just really has been a mix of emotions with the pipeline, because there's been a number of changes and conversations that haven't led where I guess I thought they would at the time.
And now the most current location you understand to be less than 2,000 feet from the north end of Heritage Reserve.
That is correct.
Okay. And so were there three different versions of the pipeline in the area north of Heritage Reserve over about a year or so?
That I'm aware of. One on 110th, one right through the middle of the development, actually over homes that were being built at the time, and then one on the north side of the development.
Did that suggest to you that moving that pipeline three times in about a year, that Summit does have an ability to move that pipeline if they have the desire to do so?
I believe it did.
Okay. Now, in terms of the homes that you described in Heritage Reserve of being the lowest price $750,000, the highest price $1.5 million, be fair to say these are high-end homes?
I think that's fair to say, yes.
Okay. You would be one of the builders in Bismarck who builds higher-end homes, is that true?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And so what effect do you think having the pipeline less than 2,000 feet from your development is going to have on your sales of homes to people who are willing to pay that kind of money for a high-end home?
Well, I think when people are considering purchasing a lot or buying a new home, there are any number of factors that they consider. Certainly, risks to their health is not one that's typically on the radar. So my concern, both directly and indirectly, is that the fact that this pipeline is so close to the development will potentially put people's health at risk, but even more so take away their peace of mind, and people aren't willing to invest a lot of money in real estate if they don't at least have that.
And what communications have you had with individuals about their willingness to purchase lots or purchase homes in Heritage Reserve with the Summit pipeline being projected to be that close?
To be honest, I haven't had many direct conversations, and I've always been just a little bit afraid of what that conversation would look like, because when I work with the client, first and foremost, I want them to know that I'm going to take care of them, and that's how we get clients the second time and a third time, and we have families and relatives, friends that build with us. So I fear right now, if someone would ask me if it's safe to build a home close to this pipeline within 2,000 feet, I don't feel like I'd be comfortable telling them that they could be safe, and that's a real concern for me.
Okay.
More so, as much or more so than the monetary equivalent.
Okay. I mean, does the possibility that this pipeline will be installed just less than 2,000 feet north of your subdivision put you in what could be characterized as a no-win situation?
Yeah, it absolutely does, because if I stand by and I do nothing and I don't share my concerns with the Public Service Commission, then I can be essentially guilty of remaining silent when I should have been protesting. I think there's an Abraham Lincoln quote that is something to that extent. If I jump up and down and I say you could be in danger and we can't get this thing moved, then I could be essentially shooting myself in the foot, which is a tough position to be in. I never started Heritage Reserve with the idea that it would be a one-phase development. People don't, I don't know how much you can tell from the picture, but people don't invest the kind of money in the two separate features at the entranceway. I didn't have to put in a park. There's no other rural development that I know of that has a park. But I wanted to do it because I thought it was something the community could use, and I wanted to do it because I thought that it was something that would be justified by future phases. We have a centralized sewer system in the subdivision as well. I didn't have to put in a centralized sewer system, but I did it because I felt like that was the best investment long-term for that subdivision. I've invested a significant amount of money in all of the infrastructure that we put in place, as well as some of those features that only make sense if the development continues to build out.
Okay. And so what would the economic impact be to you and your business if you're not able to carry through with the development of Heritage Reserve due to the installation of the Summit Pipeline and concerns by potential buyers that it's just too close and too risky to live that near a high-pressure CO2 pipeline?
Well, I think there's the concept in our community that having a development is just kind of a big money grab. Anybody that can be a developer, there's a big stash of money at the end of the rainbow and everybody gets it. Well, the trick is to being a developer is you have to take measured risk. You have to do your research at the outset. You have to understand what the county commission is doing. You have to understand what the county staff expects to see in a development. And then you have to put all your money out front. You have to buy a chunk of land that's very, very expensive. When you do something like this and put the kind of infrastructure that I have in place, the end of the rainbow isn't the first phase. It isn't even the second phase. I mean, it's down the road. And so having an unknown like Summit Carbon Solutions pipeline being within 2,000 feet of that land is really something that could create incredible problems for this development and I think our community going forward.
Okay. And in terms of your business and you personally, if you're not able to develop all those lots and build the homes on them, do you believe that will result in a significant economic loss to you?
I think it'd be hard to think of it as anything other than that.
Okay. There was some discussion by Commissioner Bittner, and I think you may have been here for his testimony, where he presented some information on the tax impact of Heritage Reserve, and I think he also talked about the ranch and what the tax contribution would be to taxes in Burleigh County from Heritage Reserve if all 180 lots were ultimately built on and had homes. Do you recall that?
I did hear that, correct.
Okay. And do you recall the number he gave for the tax?
Yeah, I have never reviewed the document that he was referring to, but I believe it was like $500 and some $1,000, something like that a year.
Sure. And have you done a calculation as to what the tax implications or benefits would be to Burleigh County when this project is fully built out, the 180 lots?
So I think one thing that's difficult about any calculation is that it's essentially a projection. Right now, there are 180 lots planned to be built out in Heritage Reserve. There could be more. There's a possibility there might be a few less. We're trying to ask questions about exactly what the tax value will be and the average lot will be, or the average value of a home will be. So what I did to try to put it into a number for the commissioners to consider was I took the homes that we have completed in that subdivision right now and the average tax that they're paying, and it came out to about $4,800. So if all those 60 first lots are built out at that price, it would be $288,000 a year. If you add the 120 lots that are coming in the next phase, that would be $864,000 a year, and that's just 1 year of taxes for that specific subdivision. And my subdivision, frankly, is one of the smaller rural subdivisions out there. There are ones that are much larger than mine.
Okay. So the tax revenue to Burleigh County, you're projecting at this point conservatively to be about $864,000 a year when all 180 lots have homes on them.
That's correct. Yes.
Did you at one point have an option to buy additional land near Heritage Reserve in the event you decided you wanted to add on to the development and it was successful?
Yes, I did. Looking back to those conversations with the landowners, that I purchased the initial property from, and actually you heard from several of them today because they're still adjacent to Heritage Reserve. They weren't entirely sure that they wanted to sell all their property at one time, and so what we agreed on was an option agreement for the other pieces should they decide to sell to another buyer, just so that I could have some sense of certainty as to what was happening with the land around me.
And where was the land that was the subject of the option that you had?
It is directly to the north and the east of Heritage Reserve.
And did you end up exercising that option?
I didn't. No, at the time, anytime you start a rural subdivision or something brand new, it takes a little bit of time to get it going. So I would say lot sales were a little slower in the first year than I had projected. Looking back on it now, though, with everything that's gone on, the fact that the pipeline is projected to be right across that property, one of the owners, Susan Doppler, was joking with me at one of the last public hearings we were at, and she said, "Boy, I sure we wish we'd have sold that land to him now." And my response was, "Well, I'm sure glad I didn't buy it from you, because with all the uncertainty that this pipeline causes, it just wouldn't be a secure investment at this point."
You weren't in Linton for the hearing where Mr. Briggs testified, but I'm sure you've heard a lot of testimony and seen information on the leak in Satarsha, Mississippi from that CO2 pipeline.
Yeah, these proceedings have been incredibly important to myself and my business. So although I was not at the Linton hearing, I was listening in.
Okay. And Mr. Briggs testified that the area where individuals could not breathe without having the SCBA, the oxygen, without having some medical condition, everything from passing out, vomiting, dying after a certain number of minutes, down to confusion and headaches and those types of things, was a distance of 3 miles where they needed those breathing devices. With this pipeline being directly to the north of your development by 1,980 feet, if we go 3 miles to the south of that, and if we made the assumption a leak occurred directly north to you, that would envelop your whole subdivision of Heritage Reserve in CO2, correct?
That's correct.
I mean, Heritage Reserve would be directly in harm's way if there was a leak in that location.
From the information that Chief Briggs presented, I believe that would be true.
Okay.
Judge, I don't mean to interrupt, but if we've got a 10:30 stop, it's 10:20, and lawyers lie and say they're not going to take very long, and so I'd like to say I'll take 1 minute. It might be a couple.
Right. Do you have much more?
Not a
Mr.
lot
Bunking?
more. I'm moving on
well,
briefly to another
You got
topic.
10 minutes, so.
Sure.
And we need to save room or time for other questions.
Yeah, I can,
Please.
just one more small topic.
Okay.
And that is the wind direction in that area where Heritage Reserve is. Where do the winds directly normally come from and blow to?
So my observation of Heritage Reserve has been much like my observation of Heritage Ridge and Heritage Park developments, which is that the wind typically comes from the north, northwest.
Okay. And blows to the south and southwest.
Correct.
Okay. That's all the questions I had.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Malberg?
I'll be brief. Mr. Moldenhauer, I want to talk just a little bit about the Heritage Park property that you developed. I think it was back in 2015. You entered into some more agreements with WBI or MDU. That development, you were involved in it, right?
Absolutely.
It's got a compressor station right there.
It does.
It's got 2 transmission pipelines bordering the property, going through part of the property on 2 sides, right?
Correct.
Natural gas, high-pressure pipeline, right?
Yes.
And you decided that you were going to develop that property despite the presence of the pipeline, right?
Our communities are very used to natural gas pipelines. We're used to developing around natural gas pipelines, but they're not like CO2 pipelines. And I think this whole room could probably attribute that.
Yeah, and we're so short on time.
Okay.
If I ask a question, if you can answer it, great. Again, you got transmission pipelines and a compressor station running within, 30 feet of people's homes, and there's market.
I'm not sure that it's 30 feet.
Okay. You reached agreements to go into the easement area itself with the walking trails and setting people right on top of high-pressure transmission.
I disagree with setting people right on top. That's not accurate at all. But once again, we're not talking about the same thing. So go ahead and make your point.
Right. I'm asking the question about a natural gas pipeline. You know what happens when a natural gas pipeline has an explosion, right? It's not good. We'll agree on that?
To me.
Excuse me?
Explain it to me.
Do you know what happens when a natural gas pipeline ruptures?
I would assume it's something bad, yeah.
Okay. You've not taken time to educate yourself about the consequences of a natural gas pipeline rupture?
Well, first you have to have a rupture, correct? And then you have to have an ignition. And I actually have had natural gas pipelines within developments that I've worked in rupture in the past. And we've had crews there right away because, like my Heritage Park development, we have a road that runs right back and forth. We have a fire station that's about a mile away. And so our community is very used to addressing natural gas pipeline ruptures and leaks, unlike CO2 lines.
On transmission pipelines, you're saying you have had natural gas high-pressure transmission lines, not service lines.
Line, no.
You don't have that experience.
We
don't
haven't
have
had
that
a
education.
Transmission line rupture. Correct.
Okay. Out at the Heritage Reserve property, I asked the question, I think it was to the person you had the option with earlier, about the railroad that bounds the development on the eastern side. Customers along that railroad include frac sands and power plants, and it moves or has the potential to move hazardous materials, right?
I don't know that to be the case.
Okay. So that's not something that you looked into when deciding
I don't know
to
what it moves.
take.
You're asking me to
Sorry,
speculate.
we've got to be able to finish the question and answer part. You did not look into what the railroad that bounds the property, like physically, immediately adjacent, did not look into what it moves. Is that right?
I have not specifically done that research, no.
Okay. And haven't researched the relative risks that go along with moving things by rail versus moving things by pipe, right?
Correct.
I don't have anything else. Thanks, Mr. Moldenhauer.
Mr. Pelham, any questions?
I have a few. Good evening, sir. The ranch development is nearby Heritage Reserve. Do you know if there are other developments, residential or commercial, that are planned in this area?
I don't have direct knowledge short of what I've been told through conversations with the planning director and conversations with Commissioner Bittner that there are other developments in the works right now that are in and around the pipeline, proposed pipeline route.
You were at the May 15th meeting with Summit Carbon Solution.
I was, yes.
You heard the testimony of Mr. Wachter as well as Dr. Warford. Anything that you didn't hear that you believe is relevant to discussions with Summit Carbon Solutions about the potential to reroute?
I think I can clarify just a couple things. First of all, I was trying to take some notes without being overly rude anyway to the conversation we were having. But Lee Blank was one of the members of the conversation representing Summit Carbon Solutions. Jim Powell was another, and then Wade Basons was the third. And they were asking us for a statement of some sort of support for the pipeline. That was kind of an interesting way that they led the conversation anyway. They said a few different things that I took notes of because I wanted to understand better what they were potentially offering. And I took notes. They said, we cannot go south because we want to avoid another DAPL. And my response to that was, the people of Bismarck, we can be a little bit frisky too when we have a project around us that we're not comfortable with. We can't go north. And crossing the river at a location other than where we're at right now on the river is off the table. And so after they kind of went about the process of explaining that. I said, well, what exactly are we here to discuss? And they wanted to know our feelings about how we could move the pipeline route to essentially satisfy ourselves. And it put us in a really uncomfortable position because, once again, we don't know what the true danger is without seeing the plume model and where that travels. And so I was the one that threw out, well, why don't you just respect the Burleigh County ordinance that has been put in place and stay 10 miles away from the ETA and 2 miles away from structures? And Jim Powell said, well, that's not going to happen because it's not based on anything. And I said, well, if you're asking us individually to move the pipeline away from our properties, I don't think anybody in this room is going to be comfortable with that, because that's just going to direct it towards somebody else's property, and then it's going to direct us for public criticism. So if you're going to do anything, consider moving it a certain distance away from the ETA. And that was kind of where the conversation ended, as far as I'm concerned. I never got the impression that they were overly serious in negotiating a reroute. I got the impression they were just trying to feel us out and see if they could make us go away if they made some small concessions.
What was your understanding then of, as I understand it, a comment that there was going to be some discussion with the board or something like that? What was your understanding?
That's where the meeting was left. The three people that were in the room didn't feel like they had the authority to make any rerouting decisions, so they were going to visit with their board and then get back to us towards the end of the week. I actually shared with them that I was going to be out of town over the next week, but they could, the other two could coordinate with me, and so I'm pretty certain of what the time frame was and was supposed to be. But I held up very little hope that there would be any real negotiation, given just the experience that I've had with Summit up to this point.
Thank you, sir. I don't have any other questions.
Sir, excuse me, sir, would you agree with the other developers and people that have testified that the stigma and negative perception attached to these proposed CO2 Summit pipeline is vastly different than a natural gas pipeline?
I would, and I would agree with it for a few reasons, and I think there's plenty of evidence of that. We don't sit in PSC hearings like this over the course of 2 days in Bismarck. If WBI wanted to extend their transmission line, we wouldn't be here talking about it. If WBI wanted to extend their transmission line, or New Star wanted to extend one of their lines, we wouldn't have a city commission weighing in on it. We wouldn't have the Burleigh County Commission. We wouldn't have home builders. We wouldn't have the people at the school board having an opinion. Obviously, the people in this room are not comfortable with this pipeline or its location, and those are the people that make the market. Those are the people that buy our homes. Those are the people that buy our lots. So if you can't make those people comfortable, whether or not you can have an engineer that says it's safe, it doesn't matter to those people, because they've already made up their minds, and our community has made up their minds about this pipeline.
Thank you.
Commissioner Chrisman?
I don't think I have any questions, but thank you for being here.
Thank you,
Commissioner Haugen-Hoffert?
Thanks, Chad, for being here. I have no
Thank you,
questions.
Commissioner.
Mr. Dawson?
Thank you. No questions.
Commissioner Dasser.
All right. And it is 10:30, so we don't have time for redirects. So thank you,
Oh, shoot.
Mr. Moldenhauer.
Too bad. Thank you very much, Commissioners, for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Great.